Hey everybody. Today's video is going to be a tad bit different from the rest of the videos I've done, mainly because I'm going to try to explain the fundamentals of modeling inside 3ds Max. So in order to understand how modeling any kind of a 3D model goes in Max, first of all, I'm going to start with the simplest or the most basic thing, and that is to explain how the subdivision works in 3ds Max. So for this, I'm going to use a simple 2D line or a spline. Over here, we have one simple arc, or basically it's a line that has 3 vertices. Now, you'll notice that right off the bat, this entire line is curved and it's making this arc. Now, if we just create this as a simple line, these lines should be straight. Now, the reason why this is arced is because this middle vertex, if I right click on it, you'll see that this one is set as smooth. If this one was set up as a corner, this would be a straight one. But since this is a smooth one, we get this kind of a curve. Now, it's very important to understand how this happens in order to be able to understand later on how this kind of a subdivision would happen in the 3D space. Now, what is responsible for this curve? Well, if we take a look at over here, in the options where it says interpolation, we have this steps slider, and we can choose to go up or down. Just to explain this, I'm gonna go over and get this to be at 1. So I'm just gonna right click on the buttons over here, and there we go. Now it's a straight line. Now notice what happens when I increase this step to 1. So I'm just gonna go and click 1. Right away, you're going to notice that here, which is basically in the middle between these two vertices, we have another virtual vertex happening, trying to get this distance between both of these vertices to curve. Now, this is basically the basis for the interpolation. Since one is the number what we have set up for steps, Max is adding one virtual vertex in between any two vertices that are connected together. For example, if I put 2 steps, then we have 2 vertices happening over here. So as it is right now, we cannot select them. They are virtual vertices, right? Because if we want to use them as an actual geometry, as we will see later on, we're going to have to slap on an extra modifier on top of it. So if we continue to increase those steps, I'm going to see we have 3, and those virtual vertices are getting this line to bend and look more arced. So the more steps we have, the more virtual vertices and the smoother the line. So basically, this is the most basic thing you can have for modeling. So since we explained the basics for the spline, let's jump over and see how we're going to do with 3D objects. So for a start, I'm going to start with these 3. Well, they're not models, but they're simple planes that have been extruded. Now, the thing is, whenever you want to work with any kind of a 3D model in Max, you want to use either a smoothing nurms subdivision option or a turbosmooth modifier. Let me show you what both of them do. So for this middle one, I'm going to click on turbosmooth. And right away, you're going to see that this entire line or this entire model got smoother. It got those 2 extra edges or those two extra geometries. And the reason for that extra geometry is this iteration. So this is exactly like it was with the spline. So I'm going to put it at 0. As soon as I put it to 1, it's going to put one extra spline in between both of these and one extra in between both of these. So this is what happens. As you can see, we have more geometry. While here you can also choose to either show or hide those isolines or the extra lines. So if we click this, we can make those lines disappear. Now, if I select the first one and go over on this place where it says subdivision surface, we have this option, use nurms subdivision. This is basically the same idea as if you would drop in a turbosmooth modifier. Now the only thing or the drawback is that this only works if your stack is collapsed, which is really not too practical because Max utilizes a lot of the modifiers in order to help you get your model to where you want it to be. So if I click this, you're going to notice that we get the same exact result. Now over here, this iteration is basically controlling how many extra lines are gonna show up here. And also if I click on isolate display, now I can see all those extra lines. So this is basically the same if I were using turbosmooth with the isolate displays. So this was the first option, to use the nurms subdivision, and the second one is to use turbosmooth. Now, I would really recommend every time when you're using modeling to go with turbosmooth. And the reason why you would go with turbosmooth is that you can actually put one turbosmooth, then apply an edit poly on top of it, continue working from there, then add another one, and continue working from there. Also, turbosmooth has an additional option in place that can help you when you're working with your models. And that option is that when it's smoothing, it has it has two options. The first one is where it will smooth depending on your geometry. And the second one is it will smooth depending on your smoothing groups. So for now, let's see how those smoothing groups would work. So I'm going to select the first one. I'm going to go over to polygon and select the whole piece. Now smoothing groups can be found over here. From what I've previously had experience, my students have at least referred to this portion as the calendar because it has 32 numbers. But that aside, if I clear it all and then just click on 1, that is going to make this entire model or this entire selection have one smoothing group. What that means is that if I put a turbosmooth on top of it and now click on smoothing groups, not much has changed because turbosmooth by default is trying to smooth everything depending on the geometry. And since the geometry is free-flowing, it basically gave us this to start with. But now let's go over to the second one. And here, select the first one and the second one. Actually, let's select them all, clear all, so we don't have any more smoothing groups. Select the first one and the second one, apply a smoothing group of 1. Select the second one, apply a smoothing group of 2. Now, let's go ahead and apply turbosmooth. As you can see, right now it's the same, but the moment we apply or click on the smoothing group option, you're gonna notice this. Now, this portion over here is smooth, while this one is still going off as a straight plane. We can do the same thing over here, where we're gonna select them all, again, clear all, And now make this number 1 and make this number 2. Again, turbo smooth and smoothing groups. So as you can see, in all of these 3 cases, we have turbo smooth smoothing by the actual smoothing groups. If I put on iterations 2, we have more geometry and better details over here. So from what we saw here, turbo smooth can smooth with smoothing groups or depending on geometry. So now let's see how that geometry smoothing would look like. So for this, I'm going to use this scene. This is basically a scene where we have 2 planes and we have a cylinder carved in. So we have a 8-sided cylinder. Now, here's the thing. If I select both of these, you're going to see that both of these cylinders, even though they're identical, the geometry, when it comes to the edges, kind of differs a bit. So if you take a look, all of the sides in both cases are quads, but there is a difference. This one goes from one edge to the end over here, while this one is going to the sides, and it's giving us more geometry. So before we go over and try to explain what is better or what is the difference, let's add a turbo smooth on both of them and see what the difference is. So turbo smooth to this one and turbo smooth to this one. So as we can see, due to the fact that this doesn't have any kind of a middle point from which it can smooth to, it's trying to collapse this form, and in turn we get this portion over here being shrinked, while this one on the other hand, because it has those 2 sides like this, it's keeping its form, so it's not losing any volume. So that is the main difference between both of these types when you have an inset like this. So another thing is, when you're working with a surface on which you want to make any kind of an indentation, you always want to keep to the rule of 8. So what is the rule of 8? The rule of 8 states that if you want to place a hole in your mesh, you need to have at least 8 sides if you want your hole to be perfect. Why is that? Well, simply because you want to have 4 sides on each side plus 1 extra in between them, so it can hold the form. So for example, if I turn on the turbo smooth here, you're going to see that this really does look like a hole, albeit not the best geometry yet, but it looks like a hole. So from what we learned previously, we can either use smoothing groups, or we can try to add more geometry. Now we saw how it looked like when we used smoothing groups. Let's see how we would get this to look if we add more geometry. Now, in order to add more geometry, I'm gonna go over and I'm gonna select all of these edges on the top side over here. And here I have the option to chamfer this. So when you chamfer, you give you give one value for however you want to however much you want to chamfer. So for example, I'm going to use a chamfer of 3, and I'm going to click OK. I'm going to keep this at 1. So I'm going to click OK. Select the bottom portion over here. So hold on Control, select the whole piece, and again chamfer this as well. So now, since both of these have edges that are close to each other, when it's trying to smooth, it's not going to go to the edge to try to find the closest edge, but rather it's going to go from one to the other edge. What this means is that once we turn on turbosmooth, this is what we get. We get a hole which is much better defined. So if you put 2 iterations and turn off the isoline display, we're going to notice that this hole is now starting to hold its form much better. Now the thing is, like this, we can really control how sharp we want our edges to be by how close these edges are. And in case we want this to be a very sharp edge, we can simply select one of the edges, click on ring, add one more connect in between them, and now this should be a much sharper edge, as you can see here. So this was this case. Now this case, on the other hand, can be a bit different. I'm gonna try to select the entire top portion over here, and I'm gonna go over and click on chamfer. Let's give it a 3 and add 2 chamfers. So right away you're gonna notice a problem, especially to the sides where we have those 2 lines converging on itself. On Max 2014, it doesn't have the quad chamfer option that the 2015 and 16 offers. Instead, when it comes to an edge where it kind of converges like this, it kind of makes a bit of a mess that you're gonna have to clean up manually. Or you can go ahead, while you have this, you can cancel this, and we can manually add all of those edges. The way to manually add them would be to go with the cut tool and try to simply cut away near the edges. So again, like this, cut just over the edges. Try to keep it as close as you can, or as uniformly as you can on all sides. So once this is done, now we simply have to go with a target weld these together, put them into position. Again, target weld, put them back to position, and target weld. And the last one with the target weld. So once this is done, we have the top edge that is going to help us hold this form. So let's go and turbo smooth this. And we're going to notice that right away we are starting to get something. Isoline display, turn it off. We get this kind of an effect. If we want this to be sharper, we can simply go over here, and now I can either use the ring and connect option and add the connect like this, or I can go to my full ribbon over here, and from here use Swift Loop. I would really recommend that you set up hotkey for this, because I always use this when I'm modeling. So in order to set a hotkey for this, all you got to do is go over in customize user interface, and from here just go in and choose or click in Swift Loop. For me, I've set this for my numpad 0, so whenever I press it, I automatically enter this mode. So it is giving me the option to add wherever I want an extra edge. So I'm going to click on one over here, click another one for the bottom, and since I want to have one more in the base, I'm going to select all of these 4 polygons and inset them for a minor value. There we go. And now if I put on a turbo smooth, you're gonna notice that my hole is really well preserved and it's really well defined. So since we saw how to deal with making a hole, let's close this and go and open up our last scene over here. For this scene, we have basically two cubes or two boxes. The main difference is that one of these boxes is basically just a box, while the other one has a few support edges added to it. Now I'm going to close my ribbon, as I will not be needing it anymore. And underneath both of these, we have two more rectangles that are the same exact size as these boxes. Now the reason for putting these two rectangles beneath these boxes is because that I want to show you that whenever you're using turbosmooth, depending on what you have or what kind of geometry you have set up for your model, your model might actually end up shrinking and losing volume. For example, if we put a turbosmooth on a cube that has no support edges, this is what happens to it. It actually spherifies. It is trying to turn into a sphere. And the reason for this is because, like we saw at the beginning, Max is trying to interpret these iterations by making the middle lines come in between those two vertices, and it's making this form. So if we take a look from the top, this is the actual form that this box had, but now since we put up the turbosmooth, it has lost a lot of its volume. Now in our second case over here, we have this box. It has a few extra edges to the sides. So now once we add a turbosmooth, we're going to notice that our cube has been rounded up a bit on the corners, but it's still more or less trying to retain that form. But again, if we take a look at from the top, we're going to notice that again we are losing a bit of volume on the corners. So this is something that you should probably be aware of, especially if you're working on a model that has strict volume or strict measurements that you have to abide for. Just take into account that whenever you're using turbosmooth, depending on how close your edges are, that is how much volume you're going to lose. For example, if I'm going to click on edit poly, I'm going to have my turbosmooth turned on. I'm going to click on show cage. This is going to show me the original cage for my model, or the one I'm working on. So I'm going to select one of the edges, loop it so it selects the whole edge. Now this gives me the option to move it around. So as you can notice, as I'm moving the cage or the basic geometry, the turbosmooth is working, and I can see the end result because I have this show end result turned off, or actually turned on. So I'm going to select this and now get this closer to the edge, and you can notice right away that this edge over here is starting to tighten up. If I put this one up as well, we're going to notice that now we have our top here really sharp. There we go. While this side, it's still retaining that roundness. All right. So with this, we actually went over the basics, the bare basics of trying to model inside 3ds Max and using the turbosmooth modifier. Now in the future I'm going to try to make a few more modeling videos where I'm going to try to explain exactly how you would tackle certain geometries like edges or holes or insertion to edges and different scenarios and how you would deal with those kind of scenarios. So again, for this video, if you guys enjoyed it, then don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, as it does really help a lot with YouTube. And this would be it for this video. I really hope you guys actually had fun, and most importantly, you managed to learn something new. So for now, take care, and I will see you all in the next video.